So today we have this mini home here that is getting moved. They're actually moving it first thing Monday next week. So we've got to get rid of those wires, which is going to that pole behind the tree. Not in the best of shape. Pole's getting pretty old, and there's an absolute rat's nest of connections, probably a lot of bare spots and hazards up there. And then for some reason the communication company ran their fiber to another pole, which they're on their way here next week. Customer was panicking a little bit as it's scheduled to be moved first thing next week. So we're going to take that down for them too. I spoke to a supervisor at the communication company, let them know they can cancel the crew. And this is the fiber right here above us. We'll get rid of that guy as well. So I think what we'll do today, we'll slap on the GoPro cam and kind of take you guys along for the journey. There's a lot of hazards that we got to be aware of while working on that pole, so we'll identify those as we move through the job. So the first thing we did was pull the meter. You can still drop the loop while the meter's on, but there's absolutely no point. It's much safer to do while the meter's off. It can prevent any backfeed in the secondary lines. Also, you don't have to worry about leaving the neutral hooked up last while you're cutting the triplex. And as I mentioned, these poles aren't in the best of the shape. The next one's quite a bit worse than this. However, we are giving the pole a bit of a hammer test. If it sounds hollow and you don't figure it's safe to climb, then don't climb it. We do have some off-road machines that we have access to if absolutely necessary. Right now I'm making sure that my belt is above that, I don't know what it is, clothesline maybe. People aren't really supposed to have anything attached to our poles at all. I'm just tied a rope around the bottom, so I'm not too worried about it in this case. I left my rubber gloves on the ground because I'm only climbing up as high as the telephone here. I'm not going to belt up and over the telephone. But what I'm doing here, I'm taking a closer look at the cutout, the transformer, the tie, and the primary. Right here we're tracing out the fiber line. The cable company, the communications companies really hate it when you just cut the fibers with pliers. So we're going to take it apart properly. It's just, there's a termination on the end, just unscrews, and then there's a cap that's screwed onto the termination box that's always left in place, so if it's ever removed, you can cap that termination box. So we're going to let that fly. We're nowhere near the live stuff, but you want to keep an eye on your tail that you don't fling that stuff up into the live lines. Just caught in a branch here, so I'm just flicking that out of the branch. And that's it. That was a 2-minute job. When I climb a pole, I usually do 2 steps. Bring the belt. Climbing down, I usually drop the belt with each step. You can bring the belt up with each step as you climb if you want to. I find it uses a little bit more energy than necessary. Most guys tend to do 2 steps lift. The only problem with that is you tend to have a dominant lag. So try to keep even steps while you're climbing. If you lift your leg up 8 inches with each step on the left, lift it up with 8 inches with each step on the right. So this next pole, this is the one I was a little more worried about. You can see it's in pretty rough shape. Even just running my hand along it, there's the shell of the pole is breaking right off. And even if the pole is solid inside, that can be a hazard while you're climbing. If your gaff bites into a piece of the shell that's ready to fall off, obviously when you put your weight on it, you're going to kick out. So we're going to take our time a little bit more on this pole, make sure that each step we take, that our gaff is fully seated, that it bites into a good solid piece of wood. A lot of you are probably noticing the belt I use too. It is an older style cross strap belt. Not something I recommend. It's an old school belt that I learned to climb with. Just what I'm used to. It does still have fall protection. If I slip at any time, the cross strap sucks into the pole and grabs you almost immediately. We're getting up into the work area here now. And again, we're taking a little pause, kind of looking around at things. We're going to belt over the telephone next. One thing that's very important when you're climbing and you're belting over stuff, or when you're climbing at all, you can see a few seconds ago I first reached towards the J-hook, but I immediately let go and reposition my hand. You don't want to grab onto something that if you slip, it's going to catch your finger. We'll get into that a little bit more when I climb back down. When you're crossing a telephone line or any line for that matter, you have to make sure that your secondary belt is fully locked into place before you remove your primary belt. You have to be tied off at all times. At no point, even if it's a simple crossover, you have to be belted in at all times. So we're just tracing out the wires here, making sure we don't cut the wrong ones, and also taking a closer look for bare spots, which doesn't appear to be any real bad ones. It's an absolute rat's nest of a pole up here. There's connections all over the place. It's quite a mess. Something that we will eventually clean up. But we're gonna get this hot out of our way first. So I'm using the Milwaukee 6-ton linear crimper with the cutting head, the ACSR cutting head, because there is a steel strand in the neutral one. This tool, it's one of my absolute favorite tools. That's been a new addition to our trade only a few years ago. We used to have to do all this stuff with ratchet cutters and bolt cutters. And using the Milwaukee linear cutter, you can cut with one hand and hold the lead with the other, which is an absolute game changer. So the only reason I'm not cutting it off flush with the 4/0, these mini homes come in and out of here like crazy, and there's already quite a bit of the space used up on the 4/0 main line. So if another home does get moved into this spot, I'll have enough of a tail that I can crimp that onto. In fact, I probably wouldn't use a crimp toe cut moving forward. I'd use a quick connect that can easily be removed. Another thing to remember is, although a lot of the body of this tool is plastics, the tool itself is not considered insulated. So while you're cutting a hot line, you want to make sure you're not touching a neutral or another part of the pole or another hot wire, and you do want to have your rubber gloves on, of course. So we're just going to tape up that other hot end there. That other spot I was taping up a minute ago was just a little bit of a bare spot showing through on an Insulink, so we were just kind of covering that up. You also notice my position on the pole. It's good practice doing line work in general to be positioned below your work area. Your hands working up over your head. That's why shoulder and elbow injuries and stuff are common in line work too. It's hard on the shoulders with your arms above your head working all day, but it's a lot better than climbing up into place and having that primary only 18 inches away as opposed to about 4 feet away right now. So very important that we control this wire, that it doesn't spring up into the high voltage. So we're going to hold on to it. We're going to get rid of this guy altogether. Throw him right to the ground. Where that meter's off, if I wanted to, I could have cut that neutral off first. Oftentimes I do, where the neutral isn't covered wire. I'll get the neutral out of there, that way there's less second points of contact to short my press out on or something. So I'll get rid of that first. But in this case here, the hots were closest to my position on the pole. So a lot of times when you're dropping a wire like this, you can just cut it, let it fly. But this pole, I don't exactly trust this pole. I mean, it's not going anywhere, so if I was that worried, I wouldn't have climbed it in the first place. But I'm not going to just cut that triplex and shock load that pole. If it was cracked or damaged internally, if the integrity of that pole is gone, it's going to break when you're dropping a wire off, and the tension suddenly transfers to the opposite direction of the wire you just cut. So instead of just cutting it and letting it fly, we're gonna lower it down in a little bit more controlled method. So there's not a whole lot of tension in this wire. I'm just gonna make a couple half hitches with my hand line and I want to make my cut past the preform. Only reason, well, there's two reasons for that. One reason, while the Milwaukee cutting head, it is designed for ACSR, which has a steel core. The preform is a heavier grade steel, and there's 4 separate strands of steel. If I don't have to use my battery cutter to cut through multiple strands of hard steel, then I won't. It can make little marks in the jaw. So we're gonna cut a little further out past the preform. And the second reason also is, as you saw a moment ago, the wire's running right through that tree. And as I recover the wire on the ground, last thing I want is for that wire to get snagged up in that tree. So anytime you're dropping wire through trees at all, you don't want to leave any crimpets on it, loose ends. If you cut the preform and it's got the hook on the end, that'll definitely snag some branches. So we're just going to grab the tension here and hold that with one hand and go past the preform. And you can see when I do cut it, when it releases, the pole doesn't jump at all. I've got all the weight on my hand line right now. So we'll lower that down. Just trying to make sure enough of it goes down the other side that I can recover it easily once I'm on the ground. And we're going to watch at the end, of course, here that I don't flip my hand line up into the live stuff. So I slow down right at the end, right here. And there's the tip. That rope, it's not conductive, but it's also not tested, so it has to be treated as a conductive object. It's not something you would ever throw up into the primary lines for any reason. There are some hotline ropes that are tested that we use. It's mostly in transmission. So now that we're done our work, we can put our leather gloves back on. We don't have the ground-to-ground rule with rubber gloves here. It's easier and safer to climb with your leathers as long as you have proper clearances. I'm just showing a little bit here when you're climbing down the J-hook. There's one particular on the back of the pole that's easy to miss, and if you get your finger hooked over top of that J-hook in the wrong way and you slip, even if you kick out and the belt catches you a foot down, it's a real good way to break your finger. So just be really mindful of how you position your hands and your finger when you're working on a pole. Don't ever stick your fingers inside eye nuts or jam them in places. And before we undo our secondary belt, we have to reattach our cross strap again for a fall arrest. And that's pretty much it. Climb down the pole. Put a bit of slack in my cross strap and then sliding the keeper on the cross strap in closer to the pole. That way it catches a little faster if I were to kick out. You can see as I get down the pole all the chunks of wood that came out when I was climbing up. Definitely not the greatest pole to be climbing. And the first thing you do when you get to the ground, take those hooks off. You don't want to be walking around in your hooks for a couple of reasons. You're going to dull your gaff, and also lots of guys have gaffed their own ankles and their feet and stuff. So you want to get those off. And right here, rather than pull the entire wire and my hand line right through the tree, we're going to just disconnect our hand line here. And since I didn't leave any burrs or hooks or rough ends in the end, it drops out of the tree pretty slick. So we'll cut this off the house. I'll have to get my ladder to get right off the mast, but we'll make a couple coils here. One nice thing about this battery cutter too, this tiny little fiber wire, it still cuts it, no problem at all. Alright, so that's all we've got for you guys here today. I think the next video I will cover the Milwaukee pipeline event that we attended a few weeks ago. We're also going to be trying out the new Milwaukee Forge batteries. We're going to put those guys to the test. I'll try and get this video up and running today. I've been running the road steady the last 3 days. This weekend so far we've had a couple broken poles. We had a hydraulic leak in a vehicle breakdown. something good to cover in a video actually, what to do in those situations. But I want to thank you guys again for stopping in. Got a lot of great feedback on the GoPro style video where I just throw the camera on, do a job, and kind of talk about it. A little bit of a voiceover as we go. We're still going to be carrying on with the Being Lineman episodes where there's minimal editing and we show the whole process from receiving the call to arriving to talking to the dispatcher. We'll be doing those as well as covering lots of tools and a lot of real cool stuff coming up. So I appreciate you guys stopping by as always. I'll get this posted up today unless that phone rings again, which it probably will because it's been busy. But thanks guys. We'll see y'all soon.